Hi everyone, here is Tatiana Bazzichelli, the director of the Disruption Network Lab, and we are now starting the second day of the conference Smart Prisons, Tracking, Monitoring and Control. Before starting introducing the great speakers that I have with me today, I would like to introduce what we are going to do the whole day and also introduce, first of all, the team that worked with me. As usual, I am happy to name one by one Elena Velianowska, Ozlem Kaya, Daniela Silvestrin, and Sabina Barcucci that work on the production. Lauren De Carli, our admin officer, Jonas Franchi that work on the press and design, Agnese Trocchi and Alice Bazzichelli that worked on the communication, and Cassie Thornton that worked as a community developer. As I say, we are now connected from the Kunstquartier Betania and the Studio One in Berlin, and this is our conference, Smart Prisons, Tracking, Monitoring and Control. First of all, also I would like to say welcome to our audience offline and online, and remind the people that are online that we will have a chat that they can interact with. And first of all, as well, I would like to thank our great team, the streaming team that is doing always a wonderful job, Boiling Heads Media. And again, I would say for the people that are connected on YouTube, that they could go on our website, disruptionlab.org, and there they could find the chat that they are interacting with, and they could use it during the question and answer moments to ask questions to our speakers. So use this tool if you are online, because also we want to hear your voice. And I would like to thank the funders and partners that made possible this conference, especially the Senate Department for Culture and Europe of Berlin, the Riva and David Logan Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, and we are working as part of the New Perspective for Action, that is a project by Reimagine Europe, co-funded by the European Union. Then on the screen you can see all the list of our cooperation partners and also our media partners and the people that are working as outreach partner. So let's enter into the program of today. And yesterday I would like to remind and describe a bit what we were touching yesterday, because usually when we organize these conferences we always try to create a narrative. And especially to understand in which way we work with the discourse of smart prisons, with the idea of tracking, monitoring, and control. So yesterday we concentrated on system of oppression in prisons, detention centers, and at borders. The videos are already online if you want to check. And today we are instead investigating systems of surveillance, tracking and monitoring, and the effect of technological violence directed on activists and dissidents. That is also a really big part of the idea of tracking, monitoring and control. So we are starting with the panel, revisiting the Genoa G8 2001. That is actually something that we wanted to do since very long time. We did it now at our conference number 29, and I'm very grateful also for the people that are with me on stage and that are connected online for doing this with us, because also I know how challenging it is for all of us to bring back all this situation. But it's something that must be done, and I hope that we will keep discussing about what happened 20 years ago in Genoa. After this, at 7, we will have a panel targeted by surveillance, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, and network repression, with Stella Assange, Kevin Gozzola, and Stefania Maurizi. And after that, we will have the screening of the film Ithaca, also in relation to the situation of Julian Assange. The film will be in English with German subtitle, so you are also welcome to stay the whole day with us. And we enter now in the depth of this panel. And I want to welcome the people that are with me on stage. Carlo Bachschmidt, that is a film director from Italy, and MF, that is a social worker, also from Italy, but now based in Berlin. And Dan McQuillan, that is connected with us online from UK. So I would say let's make an applause to all the people here. And so I will just start first to ask and introduce why we are speaking about this panel in a conference about smart prisons and why we are going back 20 years ago. This has been also an interesting discussion that I had with the all panelists because they were asking me, but why are you speaking about Genoa if we have to speak about smart prisons? And so this is my perspective, but not only mine. I think at the end we all kind of agreed with this perspective, and is something that connects all the people that are part of this conference, saying that the concept of smart prisons also extends beyond technology. And we can track back on the creation of algorithm of security through the past 20 years. And with this algorithm of security, I speak about something that is not just related to technology, but is an idea of technological violence and oppression that can be created and directed at activists and dissidents. So if we think about an algorithm as a set of procedures, what has been implemented in the post-9/11 society and since 9/11 has been a process of controlling dissent by enforcing new set of shared rules. And so we all witness the increasing security that from that time developed, and also the fact that became integrated in our daily life. And this also connects to the broader notion of technology that is a kind of a systemic development. But at the same time, I just don't want to have these very dark views. Just yesterday we were discussing this. Do we always need to be so pessimist? And of course, what you will see today, there is a lot of reason to be pessimist and to be angry, but what we also want to bring in this panel is a form of resistance, and the fact that since we are still here speaking about these subjects, and I know also that in the audience there are people that were part of this scene, and not only here in Berlin, but also online. With this scene, I speak about what was happening at the end of the 90s, beginning of 2000. For me, this also shows something, that we believe that something can be done, that we are still doing with our lives, and we don't just give up as they wanted us to do. And in this panel, as I say, we decided to bring together different personal experiences. One will be from Carlo Bachschmidt, that for 10 years worked in the grassroots forensic investigation of Segreteria Legale, that could be translated in English as the legal secretariat, that was related to the G8 Genoa events of 2001, and set up to assist the lawyers in the trials of after the G8. And then we have MF sitting here close to me, and then McQuillan, that are activists also that experience the police brutality and torture at Diaz and Bolzaneto prison. But also they use these events in their lives to build up a new form of resistance, as we will see later. And then I'm also very happy that he is with us, because he will be then connecting this discourse that we are discussing on the aspect of the implementation of AI. And this is also gives the title to the panel. Another world is possible, but it needs a new kind of computing. I mean, if you remember from these years, this another world is possible was our motto, and now we are extending it to what is happening today, and the idea also, how can we create this resistance using technology and going beyond technology. And so, as I say, these events also relate to the personal experience of many, and I want to give a little warning because especially when Carlo will speak, we will show also some films. There will be the moment of the break-in of the police in the Diaz school, and these moments has been very sensitive for a lot of us. And so I just want to prepare the audience about these things that we will see. And personally, I mean, I don't want to put myself into the discussion, but since we are here at the Disruption Lab, I also want to mention that what happened exactly in that days in Genoa has been also a very strong input for me to develop the Disruption Network Lab, even if this is almost 20 years after, and we are doing our work since 9 years. But the repression made us reflect on how to imagine new form of politics that were not becoming just trapped in this dichotomy of oppress and being oppressed, but also try to find new strategy of creating resistance, of imagining our politics, our society, and still keep fighting all together. And so if you also, I mean, I just mentioned, we have at the entrance our book, Whistleblowing for Change, and I also tell this experience there because personally I was not in Genoa, so I didn't have this moment of violence that my colleagues and friends here experienced, but I was in connection through Radio Gap in Florence with the group of Strano Network. So for me it was also very touching because we experienced live in connection with Radio Gap the moment of the police breaking inside the media center, and was very traumatic also for us. So just to say that this is something that connects all of us and the people I think in the audience. And so I'm very grateful for everyone to be here. And before Carlo starts, I want also, let's make an applause also for the joy that we had that days that was destroyed but is still going on. So now we start with Carlo, and I would like to say, also properly introduce him, beside the work that he did with the legal secretariat for the G8 trial. He's a film director and was born in Genoa. He's an architect. He specializes in the analysis of archival photographic video material and wrote and directed several documentaries, including Black Bloc and La Scelta. He also works as a technical audiovisual consultant for the courts of Genoa, Milan, and Turin. And I want to say that Carlo is going to speak in Italian because this is the language that for him functions better, but we will have the subtitle in English on the screen. Thank you, Carlo. Now it's up to you.
Allora, buonasera a tutti, è un piacere essere qui e ringrazio Tatiana per avermi invitato a questa conferenza. E oggi proverò a raccontare la storia di uno dei primi casi di indagine forense militante. Si tratta del risultato di un lavoro sulla ricostruzione dei fatti relativi al G8 di Genova. Mi scuso per non parlare in inglese, sullo schermo potrete seguire la traduzione e spero che questo possa essere di vostro interesse. Sono consulente tecnico di parte in processi penali documentarista. Questa esperienza professionale nasce a fine degli anni 90, partecipando attivamente al percorso di costruzione del Genoa Social Forum, il coordinamento delle organizzazioni che contestavano il summit, poi proseguita con il Genoa Legal Forum, il gruppo informale degli avvocati impegnati nella difesa dei manifestanti Dal 20 al 22 luglio 2001 a Genova si svolge il G8 di Genova, l'incontro annuale degli 8 paesi più ricchi del mondo. Viene scelta come sede dell'evento il Palazzo Ducale di Genova, nel pieno centro cittadino, ai limiti del centro storico. Intorno al quartier generale del Vertice viene definita la zona rossa, che impedisce l'accesso alle persone non autorizzate, e la zona gialla, dove sono impegnate la maggior parte delle forze dell'ordine. La zona rossa ha un perimetro di 20 km ed è protetta da grate di ferro alte 5 metri, e l'accesso è possibile attraverso alcuni checkpoint solo ai residenti muniti di un pass rilasciato dalla questura. Sono chiuse le stazioni ferroviarie di Brignole, entra in funzione solo per i treni speciali. Sono chiusi i caselli autostradali, il porto e l'aeroporto, dove vengono installate batterie antiaeree contro possibili attacchi terroristici. Viene decisa la sospensione del Trattato di Schengen, che prevede la libera circolazione dei cittadini della Comunità Europea attraverso le frontiere nei paesi che la compongono. Le autorità di pubblica sicurezza consigliano ai genovesi di chiudere gli esercizi commerciali e di lasciare la città. Genova, in sostanza, è isolata dal resto del mondo e sottoposta al più minuzioso controllo da parte dell'apparato di polizia. 15.000 appartenenti alle forze dell'ordine e all'esercito sono dispiegati su tutto il territorio cittadino a difesa della zona rossa. Nel dicembre del 2000 nasce il patto di lavoro, che in seguito assumerà la denominazione di Genoa Social Forum, un coordinamento internazionale a cui aderiscono oltre 1.000 organizzazioni intenzionate a manifestare in occasione del G8. Voi G8, noi 6 miliardi è lo slogan del Genoa Social Forum. Il Genoa Social Forum promuove inoltre 3 giornate di manifestazioni in strada in concomitanza con il vertice. Il corteo dei migranti di giovedì 19 luglio si svolge senza incidenti. Venerdì 20 è invece il giorno delle azioni dirette, in occasione dell'apertura ufficiale del vertice, con 2 cortei e 5 piazze tematiche. Infine sabato 21 luglio è il giorno del corteo unitario e internazionale che chiude le giornate del controvertice. La questura prende atto di queste manifestazioni e le autorizza, assegnando a ciascuna un responsabile di pubblica sicurezza per garantirne lo svolgimento. L'esito è drammatico. Dopo più di 20 anni in Italia vengono impiegate anche le armi da fuoco per contrastare i manifestanti. 300.000 i manifestanti che parteciparono al controvertice, 15.000 le forze dell'ordine e militari impiegati per gestire l'ordine pubblico, 6.125 i lacrimogeni usati tra il 20 e il 21 luglio 2001, 1.000 i feriti, 660 ricoverati in ospedale, 360 gli arrestati, 18 colpi d'arma da fuoco sparati e un manifestante ucciso. Dopo il luglio 2001 ho seguito le vicende dei primi arrestati e tenuto i contatti con i media di movimento, ricevendo centinaia di testimonianze, foto e video. Ho così deciso di raccogliere tutto il materiale che veniva prodotto in quei mesi affinché non andasse disperso e potesse essere così utilizzato dagli avvocati che nel frattempo avevano dato vita al coordinamento informale del Genoa Legal Forum. Nel gennaio del 2002 nasce la segreteria legale del Genoa Legal Forum. Gli avvocati impegnati nelle varie difese hanno deciso di coordinarsi per assicurare a tutti i cittadini incarcerati, 465 persone, e successivamente processati una difesa efficiente, e a tutti coloro che hanno subito violenze, 307 parti offese, e a cui è stato negato l'esercizio dei diritti fondamentali, la possibilità di fare luce sulle responsabilità individuali e centrali e di essere risarciti per i danni subiti. Sino al 2004 sono il consulente tecnico a svolgere l'attività di analisi e archiviazione di tutta la documentazione videofotografica e cartacea relativa alle giornate del G8. Dal 2004 al 2008 sono impegnate nella segreteria legale circa 10 persone, tutte nominate consulenti tecnici che hanno seguito i processi sino al primo grado di giudizio. Dal 2008 al 2011 segue le fasi processuali dell'appello e Cassazione. La segreteria legale ha sostenuto il lavoro di 150 avvocati per la difesa di circa 100 imputati e 300 parti offese, spesso straniere, e ha permesso ai numerosi avvocati italiani e stranieri di restare in contatto, avere uno spazio comune dove verificare le strategie processuali in maniera coordinata e condividere gli atti processuali, i video, le foto che i consulenti tecnici hanno visionato e analizzato per le udienze. L'attività della segreteria legale è stata sostenuta da diversi soggetti: il Comitato Verità e Giustizia per Genova, Supporto Legale e il Comitato Piazza Carlo Giuliani. La documentazione sul G8 è costituita da materiali di differenti formati che abbiamo archiviato ad uso processuale al fine di poter seguire i diversi procedimenti scaturiti dai fatti di luglio. Nel merito, l'archivio si costituisce da una parte audiovisiva, foto, video e audio, e una cartacea, atti processuali e rassegna stampa. Si tratta di circa 1350 ore di video, 80.000 foto, 18.000 audio. Questi ultimi comprendono le comunicazioni radio dei carabinieri e polizia, le telefonate del 112 e 18 intercorse nelle giornate del 20 e 21 luglio, le dirette radiofoniche di Radio Gap e Popolare del 21 luglio. Tra i materiali prodotti dalla Procura di Genova sono di particolare interesse gli atti della Commissione parlamentare di indagine conoscitiva, occasione in cui sono stati sentiti tutti i vertici della Polizia di sicurezza, enti locali, ministri del governo. Oltre a tutta la documentazione sulla formazione della Polizia in ordine pubblico, è stato possibile consultare anche le numerose informative che i due servizi segreti italiani, centinaia di annotazioni e report sulle attività di alcuni militanti e l'organizzazione delle manifestazioni in piazza. I processi. La Procura di Genova ha impiegato molte risorse per avviare numerosi processi contro circa 465 manifestanti e 194 tra poliziotti, carabinieri e sanitari. Tra i processi più importanti si ricordano quelli contro le forze dell'ordine, il blitz alla scuola Diaz e le torture della caserma di Bolzaneto, nei quali 307 manifestanti si sono costituiti parte offesa, e poi quello contro 25 manifestanti imputati per devastazione e saccheggio per le 2 giornate di scontri. Non si è invece mai celebrato il processo per i fatti di Piazza Limonda. Per la morte di Carlo Giuliani il carabiniere Mario Placanica fu indagato per omicidio. Il giudice per le indagini preliminari lo prosciolse per legittima difesa e uso legittimo delle armi. La perizia realizzata durante l'inchiesta stabilì che il colpo che uccise Giuliani fu sparato verso l'alto, colpendo un sasso lanciato da un manifestante, deviando così la sua traiettoria e raggiunse il volto di Carlo Giuliani. Questa ricostruzione dei fatti è sempre stata contestata dalla famiglia Giuliani, che ha cercato di aprire un processo sul tentato omicidio, anche sullo sfondamento della fronte di Carlo, avvenuto successivamente allo sparo. Per i fatti della Diaz ci furono 29 imputati tra dirigenti e funzionari di polizia. La Corte di Cassazione confermò 25 condanne per falso ideologico, lesioni aggravate in concorso, introduzione delle bombe Molotov nella scuola e violazione della legge sulle armi. Per i fatti della caserma di Bolzaneto, l'assenza del reato di tortura nell'ordinamento ha portato in Cassazione a 7 condanne e 4 assoluzioni su 45 imputati per reati di altra natura, come per esempio l'abuso d'ufficio. Nessuno tra i dirigenti di polizia coinvolti nei fatti di Genova subì arretramenti di carriera. Chi lasciò la polizia ebbe importanti ruoli in società pubbliche e private. 25 manifestanti sono stati imputati nel processo per devastazione e saccheggio, tutti condannati con diverse condanne, 13 per danneggiamento, 1 per lesioni, 10 per devastazione e saccheggio. In tutto furono comminati 110 anni di carcere, con pene che vanno dai 6 ai 15 anni. Il processo ai manifestanti. Il reato di devastazione e saccheggio, introdotto nel dopoguerra e mai contestato per scontri di piazza, è stato riproposto dalla Procura di Genova per i fatti del G8 del 21 luglio. Gli elementi che integrano il reato sono l'ordine pubblico messo in crisi e il danneggiamento ripetuto di beni anche tramite e con partecipazione psichica tra gli imputati. In pratica non occorre aver effettivamente devastato, ma è sufficiente essere presente mentre gli altri devastano. Le indagini che portano al rinvio a giudizio dei manifestanti cominciano subito dopo il G8, quasi esclusivamente grazie a immagini di video e varia provenienza diramate a tutte le digos d'Italia. Sono 25 manifestanti che hanno manifestato in diversi contesti di piazza durante le giornate del 20-21 luglio. Il processo inizia nel 2004 e nelle udienze dei primi 2 anni vengono sentiti cittadini genovesi e molti appartenenti alle forze dell'ordine presenti a Genova. Tra i poliziotti e i carabinieri che si sono susseguiti sul banco dei testimoni sono risultati molto significativi per la ricostruzione della difesa il primo dirigente di polizia Mondelli, il capitano dei carabinieri Bruno e il dirigente di polizia Gaggiano, chiamati a testimoniare principalmente sui fatti di via Tolemaide. Questi testi hanno consentito la prima ricostruzione completa della carica al corteo autorizzato delle tute bianche. Mario Mondelli era il dirigente di piazza e in quanto tale responsabile del contingente dei carabinieri che ha caricato il corteo dei disobbedienti, mentre il capitano Antonio Bruno era il carabiniere che comandava quel contingente. Dalla loro testimonianza è emerso che la prima carica contro il corteo è stata un'iniziativa autonoma e improvvisa dei carabinieri e non come era sembrato fino ad allora una scelta fatta dal responsabile dell'ordine pubblico per quel corteo, il dirigente di piazza Angelo Gaggiano. Una carica violenta che travolge prima i numerosi giornalisti che si trovavano all'incrocio tra Corso Torino e via Tolemaide e poi il corteo di 10.000 persone che stava avanzando pacificamente lungo un percorso autorizzato. Durante i processi la segreteria legale ha prodotto 3 video sulla ricostruzione emersa dai processi. Il più noto è P, Ordine Pubblico, uscito nel 2007, e la ricostruzione della carica dei carabinieri al corteo autorizzato dei disobbedienti attraverso la testimonianza in aula dei funzionari di polizia, di cui vediamo una breve clip.
La carica dei carabinieri inizia senza alcun motivo contro gli operatori media che vengono allontanati in direzione Piazza delle Americhe. A questo punto il 3° battaglione Lombardia si ricompatta sull'incrocio ormai sgombro. Invece di proseguire sotto il tunnel della ferrovia, attacca in forza il corteo, fino a quel momento assolutamente pacifico e disarmato.
Lei era in Corso Torino, fase in cui presumo che lei torna da sinistra, torna sulla strada principale.
Sì.
Ricorda da dove arrivavano i lanci in questa fase? Fase, diciamo, di ricompattamento della compagnia.
Ma erano delle fasi abbastanza concitate, quindi arrivavano un po' da tutte le parti i lanci. Diciamo, il lancio di oggetti arrivava di fronte e di lato, vie laterali o come si chiama, cavalcavia della stazione. Comunque che ci arrivavano dei corpi contundenti, ricordo che ci arrivavano dei sassi, quindi delle pietre, poi potevano essere bulloni, monetine, veda un po' lei, però comunque arrivavano.
Dunque, quindi lei si trova a Corso Torino, diciamo, inizio via Tolemaide. Cosa succede?
Succede che praticamente, niente, come per cercare di disperdere i manifestanti che avevo di fronte, ho ordinato di fare delle cariche di alleggerimento. Comunque, uniformandomi a quanto è successo prima, in caso di azione ostile, ho reagito per disperdere chi stava agendo in maniera ostile.
Si può vedere benissimo dai filmati che abbiamo esaminato che non c'è stata nessuna attività di contrasto attivo da parte nostra, ma ci siamo limitati a contenere le ripetute avanzate del personale, dei dimostranti di natura violenta che venivano nei nostri confronti. Ma direi che c'è stato un tentativo, come io ho detto inizialmente. Il mio obiettivo non era certamente quello di arrivare a contatto con i manifestanti in quella parte della città. Io mi devo recare altrove, quindi non c'era, da parte nostra c'è stato soltanto appunto questo tentativo di contenere l'irruenza, la violenza dei dimostranti e salvaguardare per quanto possibile l'incolumità del personale che era con me.
Un dato violento?
Direi che lì non è stato eccessivamente violento il contatto.
In cosa è consistito?
È stato un fronteggiamento tra la linea di scudi dell'arma dei carabinieri e la linea di scudi di plexiglass portati.
Ci sono stati in questa fase,
diciamo che
ci sono stati lanci di oggetti nei vostri
Gli
confronti?
oggetti hanno continuato a essere lanciati per tutta la durata dell'intervento.
Nella fase, mi chiedo,
anche durante quella fase lì.
nella fase del fronteggiamento.
Anche durante quella fase lì, anche dall'alto della sede ferroviaria. Guardi che il nostro intervento è stato molto contenuto, quindi non è che ha proseguito ad oltranza, né ho fatto intervenire mezzi speciali, né ho fatto altro per impedire al corteo di proseguire. Il nostro intervento è stato molto contenuto, è stato un intervento difensivo. Quella carica è servita a noi per poter recuperare un po' di spazio, per poter arretrare e mettere in sicurezza il personale, non è stato nient'altro.
Le consulenze tecniche. Oltre al lavoro di archiviazione durante i processi, dal 2004 si sono prodotte a dibattimento numerose memorie o consulenze tecniche sulla ricostruzione dei fatti, attraverso 500 ore di filmati, 15.000 foto e centinaia di comunicazioni radio e telefonati, tabulati telefonici relativi alle forze dell'ordine. La peculiarità delle consulenze video-fotografiche sta soprattutto nell'aver ricostruito l'estensione temporale di diversi filmati attraverso l'analisi dei metadati e successivamente averli sincronizzati tra loro così da essere visionati simultaneamente in un unico montaggio video a più quadranti. Per meglio comprendere l'utilità a montaggio a 4 quadranti, presento il caso del processo Diaz che verrà analizzato al workshop di domani. Il complesso delle scuole Diaz è costituito da 2 edifici che nel luglio del 2001 vengono assegnati al Genoa Social Forum per realizzare il Media Center Scuola Pascoli e un centro di comunicazione e training per teeni dove vari gruppi potessero coordinare e preparare le loro iniziative. Durante la settimana decine di media attivisti lavorano presso la scuola Diaz, consentendo ai vari operatori media di raccontare quello che stava avvenendo a Genova. Sabato 21 luglio, pochi minuti prima della mezzanotte, quando il media center inizia a svuotarsi e molti manifestanti stanno già dormendo all'Apertini, circa 300 poliziotti divisi in 2 colonne giungono da entrambi i lati su via Cesare Battisti e muovono all'assalto delle 2 scuole. Si tratta del cosiddetto blitz alla scuola Diaz, dove furono massacrate di botte e poi arrestate 93 persone. A seguito di questo fatto la Procura di Genova ha indagato 29 poliziotti che effettuarono l'intervento. La consulenza prodotta al processo, un montaggio video a 4 quadranti con il quale è stato ricostruito il momento in cui la polizia ha effettuato il blitz e successivamente quando ha portato all'interno della Diaz le 2 bottiglie Molotov, che inizialmente aveva verbalizzato come reperti ritrovati all'interno dei locali della scuola. La consulenza ha richiesto di analizzare la documentazione videofotografica, le dirette radiofoniche, le comunicazioni radio delle forze dell'ordine, le telefonate del 113 e 18, i tabulati telefonici, al fine di ricostruire e descrivere la presenza e i movimenti degli imputati. I reperti video sono stati reperiti in 2 formati, VHS analogico e mini DV digitale. I video VHS sono stati duplicati e acquisiti in formato digitale. Tutti i reperti sono stati successivamente acquisiti attraverso il software Premiere, così da poterli visualizzare sulla timeline del montaggio. La differenza sostanziale tra i 2 formati sta nel recupero del datacode presenti solo nei video digitali. Analoga operazione è stata effettuata sugli audio e successivamente sincronizzati con i video. Si è diviso graficamente il montaggio video in 4 quadranti, riducendo la dimensione dei filmati per poterli visionare contemporaneamente. Nell'immagine è riprodotta la schermata del progetto di montaggio. Attraverso il videomontaggio si è ricostruita la dinamica dei fatti verificatisi tra le ore 23:30 del 21 luglio e le 4 del 22 luglio, ovvero dall'arrivo degli imputati in via Cesare Battisti sino al termine della perquisizione e il loro allontanamento da piazza Merani. Il video che state per vedere è un estratto della consulenza tecnica, sono le fasi iniziali del blitz, l'ingresso della polizia all'interno della scuola Diaz.
Polizia?
Senta, mi chiamo Scotto, via Lavinia 31,
Sì.
via Cesare Battisti, mi dice mia moglie che c'è già la polizia. Si stanno suonando di brutto a Fantotto.
Dove?
Dove c'è il centro, cos'è il forum?
Ma via Cesare Battisti?
Via Cesare Battisti.
Sì, sapevamo già, grazie.
Guarda che è un macello,
Ok, grazie, sapevamo già. Ciao.
Guardi che al Genoa Forum qui di via Cesare Battisti c'è retta.
Sì, sappiamo già, grazie. Stanno assaltando, sono arrivati, la strada è in discesa, sono arrivati di botto, dalla discesa ci stanno assaltando, noi siamo due scuole, una di fronte a...
Lo sapete che hanno attaccato i ragazzi qui della scuola Diaz?
Hanno attaccato i ragazzi?
Hanno attaccato i ragazzi qui alla scuola Diaz.
Sì, signora, sono arrivata. La polizia?
La polizia?
Sì. È tutta polizia, è arrivata a piedi di corsa, sbucando dall'angolo, quindi senza neanche un preavviso, nulla.
Cioè si sente rumore. Non è che si riesce a vedere esattamente cosa succede. Però c'è un rumore che...
Sì, guardi, è la polizia. Sì, guardi, in via Cesare Battisti, ci stanno ammazzando. Sì, vabbè, arriviamo.
Ragazzi, tutto! Una macchina... Stiamo fatti, stanno arrivando! Stiamo filmando tutto!
Hanno sfondato col jeepone diciamo della scuola di fronte e stanno entrando, stanno sfondando i portoni, hanno sfondato anche la sede del G8.
Buonasera, mi scusi, io chiamo da Bachschmidt, pronto?
Sì?
Pronto, in Albaro, e sentiamo degli chiamati molto forti provenienti o da via Trento o da Cesare.
Sì, sappiamo già, grazie signora.
Buonasera.
Salve.
Finalmente Lorenzo, per favore, riprendi il tuo posto. Lorenzo, per favore, riprendi il tuo posto. Ecco, riprendi il tuo posto, i telefoni sono isolati, non riusciamo a comunicare a meno che...
118 Genova. Ciao, senti, sono un collega. Sì. In via Trento la polizia sta facendo irruzione, gli SS stanno massacrando la gente di botte, mandate subito ambulanze. Via Trento? Via Trento, no, io sono da via Trento devo mettere la finestra. In via Cesare Battisti. Sì, stiamo già mandando, mi raccomando, questi bastardi stanno arrivando in massa, stanno già spacando la testa a tutti dentro. Sì, stiamo già mandando. Sì. Prego, ciao.
Ok, stanno arrivando gli avvocati, quindi manteniamo la calma. Sono già stati informati i leader, i portavoce delle social center. Comunque noi ci siamo barricati al secondo piano, ormai la diretta è piena di 40 persone, amici ascoltatori, un momento molto tragico. I telefoni sono isolati, speriamo che le comunicazioni comunque...
Sì, buonasera.
Sì.
Io sono un abitante di via Trento qua a Genova,
Sì.
che c'è un...
Sì, ascolti, ma le volanti non le vedete?
Sì, le vedi, sono tornato indietro, adesso volevo sapere se è il caso di cercare di andare a casa.
No, ma comunque sappiamo già, grazie.
Sì, grazie.
Salve.
Però chiaramente...
Potete venire in via Coccito velocemente?
Cosa c'è via Coccito?
Non lo so, c'è della gente che sta urlando.
Ma cosa vuol dire sta urlando?
Sta urlando, non so, molto probabilmente c'è qualcuno che...
Pronto?
Ci sono dalle finestre che stanno urlando, scappate.
Via Coccito a Caltè? Sì, via Coccito. In tutta la via?
No, quella strada che poi porta in piazza Merano.
In piazza?
Piazza Merano.
Ah, sì, sappiamo già, grazie. Salve.
Abbiamo Gabriella, avevo chiamato Agnoletto, l'hai chiamato tu personalmente? Ma per cortesia chiama Agnoletto personalmente. Già chiamato. E Cristina, Simonetta l'avete chiamata? Chiunque l'ascolto, chiami i parlamentari.
Bene. Gli avvocati sono già stati contattati? Sì, i parlamentari. Qualcuno chiami i parlamentari.
Qualcuno chiama i parlamentari?
Sì, 118. Io sentire con chi dalle scuole di Diaz. Sì. Cesare Battisti c'è qualcosa dove stanno gridando. Stanno già arrivando due ambulanti. Allora, abbiamo già mandato. Va bene? Grazie a lei, buonasera.
Stanno assaltando il media center di via Cesare Battisti qui a Genova. Stanno cercando di sfondare, amici ascoltatori, stanno cercando di sfondare la porta nella quale ci siamo barricati.
Ma come non dà? Ma io cesso non respiro. Che è successo? No, lo sweeper. Cristina dov'è?
Stanno sfondando la nostra porta, non so se lo... Stanno cercando di sfondare la nostra porta al secondo piano. Bene, mani alzate, resistenza passiva. Ragazzi, uno sgombero in diretta, Radio Gap sta per essere sgomberata. Manteniamo la calma. Tutti e mani alzate.
Al termine dell'operazione, la polizia arresta tutte le 93 persone che si trovavano alla Diaz. 28 vengono ricoverate in vari ospedali della città. La maggior parte viene portata alla caserma di Bolzaneto. Tutti i 93 scopriranno solo in carcere e in ospedale di essere accusati di associazione a delinquere finalizzata alla devastazione e al saccheggio, resistenza aggravata e porto d'armi, proprio a causa delle Molotov ritrovate nella scuola. Solo 7 persone su 93 escono dalla Diaz fisicamente indenni. I feriti sono un'ottantina, 5 persone sono in pericolo di vita. Il G8 di Genova può essere studiato ancora oggi al di là delle verità scritte nelle sentenze definitive del 2012. Durante i processi è emerso chiaramente come la polizia e i carabinieri hanno operato. Da una parte la disorganizzazione e mancanza di coordinamento nella gestione dell'ordine pubblico, dall'altra l'intenzionalità di contrastare in modo risolutivo i manifestanti. L'attività del Genoa Legal Forum ha permesso non solo di scagionare dalle accuse molti manifestanti, ma anche di far emergere una ricostruzione dei fatti assai diversa da quella proposta dalla polizia. Il materiale raccolto è ancora oggi un'occasione per approfondire non solo la storia di quelle giornate, ma soprattutto conoscere meglio la relazione che diversi protagonisti, manifestanti, forze dell'ordine e cittadini genovesi, hanno stabilito tra loro in un contesto irripetibile, un esperimento politico e sociale che ha determinato l'inizio della fine del movimento di quegli anni.
Thank you so much, Carlo. Also, from what we saw, was clear, speaking about prisons, that the whole city of Genoa became a prison in that day, since the people were trapped inside, and there was no possibility to go out. I also found very important the whole methodology of the 4 quadrants that you used, because this could also be used again in the future, and could be something that is very important to learn in situations in which also the technology is not so developed. So we know that now people use a lot of systems of open source investigations, but I think what you did with the other people of your team and also the other groups that supported, like Supporto Legale, was really showing that it's possible to create a grassroots investigation using the media that were available, and also teach a lot for people that today are also doing similar forensic investigations. And now we pass to MF. And I would like to introduce him properly as I did. MF has been active in the autonomous anarchist movement since the late 90s, and he has taken part in a wide range of political projects and protests on anti-prison activities, anarchist politics, and social self-organized spaces. In July 2001, he was one of the injured parties at the Diaz school raid by the Italian police that we just saw on the film. He also holds a degree in philosophy and one in social work, and now he lives and works as a social worker in Berlin. So now I pass it to you, MF.
Thank you so much. Just a moment in order to organize the technological part of the talk. Is that working? Not yet.
Maybe then I was actually having a discussion before with the audience and speaking with Stefania Maurizi, that was telling me that yesterday in Italy there was a debate related to the fact to introduce again what created the problem in Genoa, so the fact that the torture was not considered a crime in Italy. So I was very shocked by this. Then maybe when we will have a discussion in the audience, I would like to hear a bit more from her for the last news of Italy. This also makes us think a lot of how the situation is developing, because this was a very big debate at the time, since in Italy torture was not considered a crime, and this is also why certain things were allowed to happen in Bolzaneto. So are you ready?
It seems like yes.
Great.
We found a solution.
Now I pass it to you.
Thanks a lot. First of all, thanks so much, Tatiana, and all the organizers of this conference for having me here, and thanks to my fellow speakers. My intervention will be in English, and that's not my first language. Pardon my English, and above all, pardon my possible mumbling. The character of my talk is going to be rather sharing some bits of my experience and as an anarchist and as an injured party at the Diaz raid school in 2001. And in order for that to happen, I need to contextualize a little bit the events the time before. I grew up in Rome and made it to Berlin about 20 years ago. I need to mention what was the zeitgeist back in the 90s, back in the time when I grew up. I went to school and I was politicized. I had the fortune to grow up in years which were very fertile, both on the countercultural level and on the political level. It was an exciting time where every week you would have demonstrations, school occupations, and concerts, countercultural events. Was generally like very, very exciting moment to be alive and to be young. Back in the day, there was no internet. Everybody was on the streets, creating mischiefs and having fun. In the second half of the 90s, I discovered subcultures, punk, anarchism, squats, social center, as you can see from the pictures. I began to take part in those activities and in that type of life. In Rome, back in the day, there was a large movement of squatted social centers. Was over like 40 squatted places throughout the city. Each were they had a specific character, you know. With, it was covering the wide range from anarchists to communists, autonomous. Everything was on the map. Back in the day, to use a Gramscian concept, you could say social center were the hegemonic force in the city, as they were the main producers of conflictual culture and daily struggles. Meanwhile, in the 90s, they also saw the explosion of a large anti-capitalist global movement, which was converging in different parts of the world in order to coalesce and to fight against a certain transnational institution, such as WTO, the IMF, and the World Bank. Those institutions were trying to dictate present and future lines of exploitation of the global capital with a special eye to the global south. And then there was Seattle. On the 30th of November 99, days of multiform protest and blockade took place in Seattle in the States in order to protest against the Millennium Round, which was the meeting of the WTO taking place in Seattle. I remember the explosion of literal curiosity and joy that I had while I was witnessing the riots and the blockades on the Italian TV. The composition of this movement was very wide, both international and internationalist. It was a global meeting of several territorial realities spread all over the globe. Trade unionists, anarchists, communists, self-organized peasants movements, grassroots activists. And I thought, this is incredible, and I want to be part of it. In Seattle, this very movement had been born and baptized, but this movement was going to reach the European shore very soon. And there it happened the days of Prague. Back in September 2000, 1,000 self-organized and coordinated protesters found their way to the Czech capital and converged for some days of struggles there in order to fight the meeting of the IMF and the World Bank. A train with about 1,000 protesters left Italy to converge to Prague and make their presence heard on the streets there. Of those days, I remember the beauty and the intensity of meeting people from over the world, speaking different languages, coming from different backgrounds, having different sensibilities, and employing different strict tactics in order to join the common fight against the meeting of this institution and the capital and the state. Different blocs in Prague took the streets with different tactics and tried to respect their own differences in order to reach the common goal, which was blocking the conference. I still shiver when I remember the sound of the Infernal Noise Brigade, a marching band from the States, playing the empowering and tribal music, while we were covered in a thick curtain of gas and the rocks were pelting the police. Those days showed me a world outside of Italy, and I never forgot that. And I brought back with me into my art when I went back to Italy. Worth to mention, this was the only summit which had to be cut short, and the delegates had to leave the convergence place because of the blockades. Moving further, one cannot speak about Genoa without mentioning Naples. Naples, located in the south of Italy, was the first technical counter-summit taking place in Italy in March 2001. Those days saw about 30,000 protesters taking the streets against the meeting of the Global Forum, which was discussing about the digital divide. The demonstrators have been confronting with heavy police brutality and repression. Indeed, after a demonstration which have been taken also direct actions against different symbols of capital, they've been enclosed in a square. While they were trying to make their way to the conference, the square has been enclosed, cordoned off, and heavily gassed by the police. People, no matter if old or young, have been beaten up, and it was generally a very stressful and difficult moment. After that, the police have been collecting random injured people in the 4 different hospitals of the city in order to present some arrests to justify the repression of the day. 85 arrests have been made. People have been tortured and beaten up in the Caserma Raniero. And for that, over 100 people, 105 people, have been investigated for violence, torture, and insults. 8 of them have been sentenced, 2 of them for kidnapping. All of this have been invalidated because the trial took too long, and therefore none of the policemen served any time in jail or feared any consequence. It's worth to mention, to move to Genoa and to mention the atmosphere that was in Genoa before those days in July. First of all, it's important to say that the new government of Berlusconi, which came into power in June 2001, has been merely inheriting the repressive apparatus which have been put up by the previous government, the center-left government. There is a continuity in that repression, and it's very important to underline that. However, Genova witnessed what we could say a qualitative leap forward compared to the other summits. And this in 4 different ways. First of all, there has been an unprecedented building of tension through the building of a, we can say, medieval citadel, which was the red zone. Those fences have been put up, and as Carlo already explained, only the residents could enter the city upon heavy controls. Second point is the subsequent media history. One is to say that Italian journalists already did not shine particularly for high criteria of journalism and investigative research. And in Genova especially, they made the best out of them, and they merely reproduced the so-called information which have been produced by the police and above all by the secret services, which were feeding the journalists with the news to publish. Here specifically an article by one of the main Italian newspapers, Corriere della Sera, which is, you can say, the oldest and most important Italian newspaper in Italy, and literally I will translate. The topic of the article is the use of special weapons by the demonstrators converging to Genova, above all the use of little helicopters commanded by distance, like little drones, let's say, which would drop HIV-infected blood on the head of the carabinieri and the policemen. This sounds like science fiction, but this is one can check it, 20th of May, 2001, Corriere della Sera. And has been mentioned again further on in a second article a bit later in July, where one of the policemen interviewing that article is asking, and will the protesters throw us really HIV-infected blood? So this was the atmosphere back in the day. Next point would be the unleashing of a repression previously unknown before. Back then, considering all this hysterical atmosphere, I thought, okay, this time they might actually kill somebody. It's worth to mention that just a month before in the summit in Goteborg, the police actually shot a demonstrator who spent time in the hospital. Thankfully, he didn't die, and therefore the use of firearms in this context was already an issue for the movement. Last but not least, it's important to mention the fourth point, the numbers of on the streets and the intensity of the street fighting and direct actions which happened during those days had not seen no equals in the previous summit. Despite everything, despite all the thick air in the atmosphere, several thousands made it to Genova from Italy and from elsewhere, from Europe, from everywhere in the world, in order to live 3 days of intense struggle, action, and solidarity in Genova. It would be too long here to go into the details. I will just mention a few moments of it briefly. On the first day, there has been, on the 19th of July, a giant demo with 50,000 protesters for freedom of movement in solidarity with the immigrants. The second day, the day of the thematic squares and of the demonstration, a lot of riots bursted out in several spots on the city, and the situation became quickly uncontrollable. During those events, Caro Giuliani, a comrade from Genova, has been shot dead by the Italian carabinieri. On the Sunday, over 300,000 people took the streets of Genova. Even people who actually did not want to come to Genova found their way after the murder of Carlo Giuliani to take the streets, express their solidarity and their rage. The police attacked the demo, and there has been several acts of violence and riots ensuing all around Genova, and above all, there has been a lot of repression implemented by the police on the streets. It's worth to mention that once again, the police try not to leave a way out to the demonstrators. So you have to imagine thousands of people blocked. The sea on the left side, helicopters dropping tear gas on their head from above, and there was in general a situation which provoked a lot of panic, a lot of fear, but also a lot of rage. People even tried to jump into the sea, but their police boats were also waiting for them. And the day went through witnessing and hunting of the demonstrators by the police, especially of those wearing black, because they've been made responsible of the riots of the day before and generally have been used as the scapegoats of those 3 days. After these intense days, one was thinking, Saturday evening, one was thinking that the worst was gonna be over. The day was exhausting and it was about, to collect pieces, maybe organize the legal support and see further, the atmosphere in the city was glooming. The air was very thick, sirens and police everywhere. And in general, those who were able to flee the city were just like escaping the city in panic because they feared for the worst. However, as I was not one of those, and as I had to learn on my own skin as many times in my life, at that time I should have listened to the advice of my father, who is an old comrade himself, and he advised me to fuck off as quick as possible because the worst is happening always after such moments and such a demonstration. That's where the moment when the police is then, unleashing the worst of the repression. So some little information about the complex, the Diaz Pascoli complex, where the raid took place. It was a shelter place for demonstrators, where in the Pascoli was the place where the media and Radio Gap were transmitting, whereas the Diaz school, the opposite building, was actually a place where the demonstrators found shelter and could rest and could sleep. I was there in that moment. It was about 10, 11 in the evening. We were checking the news at the computers, and I remember very clearly listening to seeing actually a truncheon destroying one of the windows at the ground floor just in front of my computer, and just at the time to look out, and the schoolyard was full of police screaming and trying to enter the building. Some people have been wise enough to try to barricade the door, and in order to try to stop the police storming the building. And me and the 2 other friends I was with at the moment, we thought, okay, if the police is gonna storm inside the building, we know what's gonna happen, because despite our young age, we were not born yesterday, and we knew what the Italian police was capable of, and therefore we thought, let's try to find shelter maybe in some corners of the building. With the spirit, we went up to one of the last floors and hide ourselves in one room and just basically pray not to be discovered. I must say some of the worst moments were this waiting, because obviously we were able to hear, to listen and to witness all the beatings and the screaming which was going on downstairs. So I cannot quantify how much time we spent there, but you can imagine that, yeah, it was fucked up, because you knew what was gonna come for you. You knew there was no escape route, and you knew that there was not gonna be an happy end to this story. After a while, police found us and just took us, separated the 3 of us, and just start to unleash the usual plethora of beatings upon us in different ways. I don't know, I think I was beaten about 10, 15 minutes, don't remember, something like that. We were beaten next to each other, we could see each other, that gave us a little bit of strength, let's say. Very important for me in that moment was to remain conscious, because I knew that they would not stop, and in the moment that I would lose my conscience, that might be the end of it. Somebody already got killed, and we knew what the Italian police was capable of. For me, it was mandatory. I need to cover my head, and I need to remain vigilant. Thankfully, I managed. I've been beaten 10, 15 minutes about. After that, at one point, after they use iron, like the truncheons with the iron sole and other means of beating, at one point they got tired, or rather, was also for them, reached the moment, okay, we might have to stop because maybe somebody died in this raid, who knows. And I was still conscious when the nurses came and they dragged me down the free downstairs. Sadly, I had to feel each of those steps because they didn't lift me, but they let my my back touch every single of those steps. That was, the last cherry on the cake, you can say. After that, I made it out in stretches, and I had on the one side the so-called 50 minutes of Warholian glory, because I made it to the Italian TV, brought out in stretches. By the way, I mean, that's the way how my parents, friends, and all of other people found out what happened to me. It was, as you can imagine, not pleasant at all. At the same time, I always say I've been lucky enough that I was one of those people, as mentioned before, that found his way to the hospital. That's because I've been so severely beaten that I couldn't make it to Bolzaneto, and I've been brought to the hospital straight. That I call this a luck because although it has been a very tough experience and traumatizing, once I've been at the hospital, I've been mostly treated very good by the local personnel, by the nurses. I've been stitched up because obviously my head was completely, broken, and the fingers and everything. But at that point, I was with my friend and another person under arrest for 48 hours in the hospital. Obviously, all the time there were policemen in the room, and they were playing games with us, trying to fuck us up, telling us, "No, you're gonna sit like 15 years in prison," and things like this, and just try to play with you. But in that moment, after those days, obviously you thought everything might be possible, like, yeah, I might as well, just come out of the hospital and go straight to prison for a few years. Who knows what they're going to be capable of. However, I spared myself the experience of having to go down in Bolzaneto, where people have been closed for a couple of days and have been enduring further psychological and physical torture, and I think that made for me a very important difference. After that, after those 48 hours, I've been having an operation, and because my prognosis was about a month of hospital with all the injuries I had, and after that, I've been, my parents came, brought me back to Rome, saw the friends, saw the comrades afterwards. And it wasn't finished there, obviously. All the experience wasn't finished there in those days in July, because on the one side, the repressive authorities have been investigating against us for devastation and looting, which carries a maximum sentence of 25 years, as mentioned by Carlo before in his talk. And for a few years, I think like this has been invalidated about 2008, 2009. For those years, we had this Damocles sword hanging on our head, and meanwhile some investigations against the police have been taking place in order to to try to collect some pieces of evidence, and also like some just money from the Italian state in order like personally, I mean, I must mention, it's important to me to say I did not have any faith in the Italian state back in the day, and this experience in Genoa was just a confirmation of my political views. Nevertheless, I think that was important that these trials have been taking place for the wider audience. However, once again, one needs to mention that all the policemen who were responsible for the raid made career in the police corpses or in similar apparatuses, and nobody actually really paid for that, but they've been pushed forward in their career, and that is, for me, just a confirmation of how the repressive apparatus and the state is working, and that nothing is to be expected from those institutions. It's, I forgot now to say some pictures, but Carlo showed it before, is the psychology of the raid here. And for me, two things are very important to mention. One is Carlo Giuliani, and the fact that memory is a very important tool. And I want to conclude my talk showing this graffiti, which is actually on the other side of this very building, and is a graffiti remembering the death and the murder of Carlo Giuliani by the Italian police, because memory is an important mechanism. It is a collective mechanism. We do not have to forget about our struggles in order to keep fighting in the future. At the same time, it's important to say that a lot of demonstrators paid for all of us for those days and have been serving a lot of years in prison. And it's important always to remember that after a fight like this, there is a repression unleashing, and that we do not have to leave our people on their own, but it's important to create solidarity and to make them feel that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, MF. It was a really touching and great presentation, and also I really want to thank you for bringing it here, because also I know you never spoke publicly about this, so this is the first time, and I really thank you for the trust as well to do it in this context. And so now we pass to Dan McQuillan, that is with us online. I'm going to introduce him. He's a lecturer in creative and social computing in the Department of Computing at Goldsmiths, University of London. He has a PhD in experimental particle physics from the Imperial College. He attended the G8 protest in Genoa in 2001 and was one of the 93 people who was beaten, disappeared, and tortured by the police in Bolzaneto, and before at the Diaz. He has worked with people learning disability and mental health issues, and he recently published Resisting AI, an anti-fascist approach to artificial intelligence. So thank you, Dan, for being with us again, because you've been at the Disruption Lab already some years ago, and thank you also for sharing this story and being in connection from London. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Tatiana, for inviting me to participate, and solidarity to all comrades who have experience of Genoa in some way or other. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I also want to make a quick disclaimer before I start. That it might be the case that I have to pause briefly if I get a little bit emotional. It's just the post-traumatic stress disorder. Don't worry about it. So, in this short talk, I'd like to draw connections between my experiences in Genoa in 2001 and my current work on AI. In particular, the book that I wrote last year. And I'm just going to share some slides. I hope you can see those slides now.
Yes.
Thank you. So this is the book. It's called Resisting AI, an Anti-Fascist Approach to Artificial Intelligence. And my argument in that book is that AI intensifies exactly the same neoliberal world order that we gathered in Genoa to oppose, as MF said so eloquently. And that the violence of that world order and the direct violence of the Diaz raid are echoed in the algorithmic violence of these new systems, and that both the repression of 2001 and the advent of AI share a reactionary response to social questions. But my real point is that there are alternatives. As the slogan, as Tatiana also already said, the slogan from those times, another world is possible, or other worlds are possible. And that the means of production of these other worlds require the prefigurative politics of the movement of 2001, and also call for a radically different approach to advanced computation. So me and my friends went to Genoa to be part of a movement. Like MF, we wanted to be part of this movement that seemed to still be on the rise, a movement against corporate globalization and the neoliberal order. It ushered in everywhere, the privatization, the precaritization, the extractivism, the dispossession. What we thought we were trying to do in Genoa was short circuit the distance between the decision making by that tiny minority and the consequences for ordinary people. Of course, the G8 was just the top layer of stacks of bureaucratic institutions, corporate hierarchies, state agencies, laws and cultural norms that still shape our lives, into which we can now add algorithms and AI, and the ways in which they amplify the abstractions, reductions, indifferent distancings, and judgmental opacities of those same institutions. Introducing deep learning boosts epistemic injustice, where the subjective voice counts for little in relation to algorithmic risk assessment. AI increases thoughtlessness in the sense that Hannah Arendt meant it, the inability to critique instructions, a lack of reflection on consequences, and a commitment to the belief that the correct ordering is being carried out. The real threat here isn't automation. It's social automatism, AI adding to the social automatism that already lubricates the cruelties of the status quo. AI itself is actually a layered arrangement of technology and institutions and ideology, whose computational operations are entangled with social relations. It doesn't come from a sci-fi future, but emerges from within this same world system. The fundamental operations at the heart of AI, whether it's ChatGPT or predictive policing, are statistical pattern finding and mathematical optimization. The G8 itself was a mechanism for optimizing the global machinery of extraction and immiseration. And it turned out that in 2001, it was also the stage for that brutal repression. It's difficult to describe the noise that woke us when the Diaz was raided. It was a mixture of smashing and screaming, of doors being kicked down, the thudding of truncheons on bodies, shouted orders, people pleading in terror, boots pounding along corridors and upstairs towards us. It's hard to imagine anything further from the quiet hum of the cooling fans in server centers as the racks of microprocessors make millions of floating point operations a second, tended by quietly efficient engineers. But my argument in the book is that AI is entangled with violence at multiple levels and scales, the same kind of systemic violence that the police were defending with their midnight attack on the school. AI's exploitative demand for low-paid workers maps onto colonial relations of power, as outsourced Kenyan workers are made to purge the abuse from ChatGPT, or the economic crash in Venezuela provides a poverty-stricken but educated workforce to label data for self-driving cars. While in Amazon warehouses, high levels of musculoskeletal disorder due to the forced speed of repetitive actions aren't tackled by assigning workers less punishing workloads, but by algorithmically optimizing their job rotation based on different muscle tendon groups. While the data-driven triage of public services conceals an algorithmic transformation of the social contract, as welfare under austerity adopts algorithmic targeting of the poor. Because machine learning doesn't only recommend the next track on Spotify, but the next household in the housing estate to be raided by the fraud officers at 5 in the morning. The raid in the Diaz school was only the beginning of the horror. As we were dragged from hospital and taken to the Bolsonaro camp, the European Court of Human Rights, the ECHR, said what happened there was torture and inhuman and degrading treatment. They labelled it a place of lawlessness in which the most fundamental safeguards had been withheld. In other words, it was a state of exception, a space where normal rights are suspended. The Genoa red zone, behind its giant metal fence, was another one. What I'm arguing is that AI also generates states of exception at a lower level, but on a much wider scale, through the invisible redlining of people's lives, enacting different kinds of exclusion. Whether it's Airbnb's trait analyzer blocking your booking because it's classified you as socially undesirable, a pharmacy system withholding opioid painkillers, or an automated decision-making system denying your visa application. The allure of AI for these institutions is not that it's more accurate or objective than humans, but that it's never going to experience a moment of ethical doubt. The smooth functioning of administrative violence, it's always vulnerable to interruption from acts of individual conscience or collective refusal. With AI, no such risk exists. AI is presented as a generalizable solution machine. Whatever the skill to be emulated or decision to be scaled, it can, given enough training data, deliver a superior version. At the same time, our status quo systems of governance are buckling under multiple and overlapping crises, from financial crashes to climate change. It's hardly a surprise that AI is heralded as the latest techno-fix for social problems, and even as a vision for humanity's future. But the net effect of neural networks acting in the world is necropolitical. Its operation of decision boundaries will produce life-preserving pathways for some, while others are allowed to die. This is obvious if we think of AI acting as it does at the borders of the European Union. But COVID-19 showed us that these logics are never far beneath the surface. In the pandemic, racialized deprivation and disability were accelerated into designations of relative disposability. We should remember that the mathematics of machine learning has deep roots in Victorian eugenics, and eugenicist thinking links directly to the idea of artificial general intelligence, which is the stated goal of companies like DeepMind and OpenAI. Meanwhile, panicking global elites are currently doing their own pattern finding, following the historical pattern of shoring up their power by turning to far-right movements and ideologies, as they did in Genoa, when the far-right interior minister dispatched fascist police units to take revenge on the protesters. The liberal order isn't willing or able to stand up to fascism any more than it's capable of regulating AI, because there's a continuous commitment across the board to eliminating the possibility that ordinary people should have power over their own lives. When I was battered down the stairs in the Diaz through a gauntlet of riot police, I passed these smashed computers that had been installed by the activists from the media centre. I'm pretty sure they're the same ones that MF mentioned. Of course, these computers had been running free and open source software, or FOSS. And the FOSS model of decentralized networks and collaborative production was also an inspiration for the political organizing and post-capitalist visions of some of the outer globalization movements. Were these hopes, like the computer screens, smashed by the repression? As the ECHR judgment put it, the sustained systemic abuse suffered by the applicants, that's us, had been intended to break down their psychological and physical resistance. I could dwell on the infinite hours standing spread-eagled in the stress position with a broken wrist and blood loss from a head wound, as Carabinieri spat on my face and shouted things like intellectual shit, or threw cold water on me in the freezing cell so that my shaking became uncontrollable. But I think there are other lessons that we can take from Genoa about solidarity and ways of organizing that can help us resist the forces of anti-democratic reaction and the necropolitics of AI. What I remember most from Genoa is the care for each other before, during, and after the terror, the collective embrace of vulnerability and difference. If a movement to resist AI means anything, it will be composed of the same concerns about boundaries and exclusions as the movement in Genoa, and will mobilize the same kind of care and mutual aid in the face of abstractions that enact actual violence. The groups and collectives that gathered in Genoa weren't only responding to the machinery of exclusion, they were generating social laboratories that prefigured alternative social forms. In the same way, the abolition of AI calls for a structural renewal based on socially useful production and the creation of more convivial technologies. In 2001, I think, we were unconsciously echoing the Luddite call to put down all machinery hurtful to the commonality, where that machinery was the mechanism of the G8. At the present moment, where power is mediated by advanced computation, we need a rebellious technopolitics to show us that another computing is possible, that supports the more than human solidarities needed for a life beyond the climate crisis. Neither capitalist realism or AI realism are realistic anymore. We need to move from cyberpunk to solarpunk, to radically rework our techno-political arrangements away from the nihilism of neural networks and towards adaptive and open-ended systems, a convivial techno-social system, one that can come into balance with its environment, where recursive coordination starts with the autonomy of the base, a system that doesn't hallucinate a total view of reality, but negotiates respectfully with the different and the unexpected. Deep learning is haunted by out-of-distribution errors, as much as neoliberalism is haunted by the hidden history of self-governing communities. Even the pseudo-creativity of generative AI is coercive on so many levels. It's up to us to reclaim the possible from the tyranny of the probable. Other worlds are possible, and they need other kinds of computing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dan, also because you end up with this positive note that I think is very important. And I also hope that in the discussion we will have all together, we will try also to share this moment and these ideas to imagine a different kind of world and a different kind of computing. So thank you, Dan, also for being with us and sharing this personal story. It was very important. Now I would like to start with a little round of questions and then open to the public. The first would be for Carlo. We have been discussing a lot also together in the preparation of this panel. And of course, the big question that always comes to mind is, why did it happen in Genoa? And your conclusion were reflecting on the modus operandi of the police and the carabinieri during the G8, which shows the disorganization in the management of the public order. And why do you think that the public order was lacking coordination and management so much, considering that the summit was planned a long time in advance? In our discussion, we were mentioning that to create a void of power is also a political choice. And what do you think about?
Ma la scelta che è stata fatta è stata quella di delegittimare un movimento che non era quello di Genova, ma era un movimento internazionale che era nato un paio d'anni prima.
So Carlo is saying that the choice that was done was the one to delegitimate, to bring down a movement that was not only the one of Genoa, but was born some years before.
E che in Italia la polizia ha preso il posto, diciamo, della politica nel rapporto con il movimento.
And that in Italy the police took the place of the politics in the relationship with the movement.
E questo era già chiaro mesi e mesi prima con un governo di centrosinistra, perché noi poi prima del G8 abbiamo avuto le elezioni ed è intervenuto un governo di centrodestra.
And this was already visible before with the government of center-left, because then the G8 happened later when there were the new election and started to be a government of the right, of center-right.
Con questo voglio dire che la scelta è stata quella di, indipendentemente dal colore, diciamo, del governo, dallo schieramento del governo, di considerare chi protesta come un problema di ordine pubblico e come tale escluderlo da qualsiasi possibilità di incontro, cosa che il Genoa Social Forum ha chiesto, e di delegare alla polizia la risoluzione di questo problema.
And so it says that the decision was independently by the different political direction and the different political parties was the one to give the power to the police to determine certain situation in the public order, and then don't hear the voice of the movement that instead wanted to make the voice heard. Okay. And then another question that I have for Carlo is that the trial for the events of Piazza Limonza was focusing on the killing of Carlo Giuliani, but never took place. And did you and your team have a chance, or at least tried, to reconstruct what happened there and apply the montage of the 4 quadrants to that occasion?
No, il processo che non c'è stato, dunque la ricostruzione di Piazza Limonda non è stata studiata come gli altri processi con i montaggi a 4 quadranti.
So the process that never happened in Piazza Limonza was never reconstructed through the montage of 4 quadrants.
Però diciamo in collaborazione anche con un collettivo che si chiamava Pillola Rossa di Indie Media, abbiamo come dire, indagato meglio sia sulla dinamica di quello che era successo in Piazza Limonda, sia chi fossero i responsabili che hanno agito in quella piazza.
And together with the collective of Indie Media that was called
Pillola Rossa.
They were trying to do the investigation what happened in the Piazza Limonda, what was happening in the context of that situation.
E niente, abbiamo scoperto, era già emerso durante l'autopsia, ma è emerso con maggiore evidenza che Carlo Giuliani, come ha sempre sostenuto la famiglia, è stato ucciso 2 volte, una dallo sparo e successivamente dallo sfondamento della fronte.
And that was clear from the autopsy and also how they demonstrated to their investigation that actually Carlo Giuliani was killed twice, one through the shooting and one through the smashing of his forehead.
Dall'altra parte i dirigenti, i carabinieri che comandavano quel gruppo di carabinieri che poi si sono ritirati, erano responsabili, erano come dire presenti anni prima nelle questioni che si sono rivelate importanti della Somalia, in cui Ilaria Alpi fu uccisa, e dunque come dire avevano un precedente storico importante.
And so the Carabinieri that has been involved in the situation of the killing of Carlo Giuliani were already having a situation before that involved their acting in Somalia during the killing of Ilaria Alpi. So they were not people that were absolutely unknown. Okay. Then I have also 2 questions for MF. You were one of the people that experienced the violence during the G8, as we saw, but also from your presentation we learned that these days were an occasion of positive sharing and also lively political protest that started with a lot of joy. And it seems that you kept inside this positive attitude despite what happened to you. Would you like to tell us a bit more what this experience meant for you in developing your personal activist resistance?
Sure, I'll try to make it quick. First of all, I need to say that obviously I was very young, and I think like a key element for this was the recklessness of those years, which makes you overcome sometimes even the worst traumas. Another key element was, and here I'm quoting like the militant anti-psychiatric movement from back in the day, in the 70s. I try to turn my trauma into a weapon, and I tried like to focus on the positive sides of what those days, those years gave to me, you know, of which repression and brutality was only a part of it, and this part shouldn't overshadow all the other moments, all the other moments where you discover mutual aid, solidarity, those friendships and comradeships which have been forged in those years are still standing to this day, And I think I tried just, to keep this positive focus. And I was also helped by, as I was mentioning in the presentation, that already then, like, I had no expectations in the apparatus of the state and in capitalist democracy. And because I already had this previous knowledge and conviction, then was maybe for me a bit easier compared to maybe some others to, just not to sink in depression and inactivity in the years after. Because I know a lot of people who have been in the Diaz school, who have been in Genoa, also here in Berlin. Many people never go back to Italy for many years. They were completely traumatized, even people with a long history. Another thing for me worth to mention is also that for me it was very important to see myself not as a mere victim, and that I've been in the past 20 years extremely annoyed by the fact that we people from the Diaz school have been mostly seen as a victim and not also active agents. Among those people, there were a lot of people struggling in different forms and with different experiences, and we are not only victims, but we are people acting consciously. And this aspect has been completely forgotten in the narrative of the last years, and I hope that with this little contribution I'm giving a little bit, bringing this perspective too.
Yeah, and so connected to that, I have other two questions that I bring together because we don't have so much time. I also want to open to the audience. I mean, I found it very interesting also the way you were speaking about the media misinformation that was happening in that time, and that was already an issue we could see. But also we know that this time was very important because it's when many collectives were developing independent media tactics and critical information platform. For example, the story of indie media says it. And could you tell us a bit more how independent media actually played an important role in informing, creating counter-information during the summit? And then in relation to that, would be important to mention also a bit more about the work of Supporto Legale.
With pleasure. Because you're quoting in the media, one has to say that in the media went online exactly on the 30th of November 1999 with the protest in Seattle, and has been developed further on and is in some countries still existing to this day. Italy back in the day had, as I mentioned before, a very fertile autonomous movement, very multiform, and one part of it was also focusing on the counter-information and the creation of alternative structure in order to fight current misinformation and to push this idea of media activism in the sense that each of us can tell his or her own story in a collective way and oppose the dominant narrative and narration. That's what indie media has been doing also in Italy, where it was born in the year 2000, and found in Genoa a very high, maybe the highest expression, where in the Pascoli school they set up together with Radio Gap, which little mention was a network of different autonomous radios from the movement in Italy, plus Radio Blackout, which was one from Turin, also worth to mention, very important. And they've been set up the media center, where actually the highest outcome of information in general has been coming out in those days. I mean, the journalists in Italy and elsewhere were, let's say, stealing or like getting their information supply thanks to the narration produced by activists in the streets, which thanks to the means of open publishing were able to bring this online in real time. And this has been an incredible revolution that in those years contributed massively just to build a different narration against the one of the state. In the year 2004, from Italy in the media, a bunch of comrades and activists decided it was about time to intervene against the the trial and the repression that has been unleashed against a few comrades and activists who were being made responsible of those collective days. Therefore, they created supporto legale, legal support, which up to these days was working also like in some years in a strict connection with the work of Carlo and the others, and they've been basically like just in different ways supporting the defendants, which finally have been seen a lot of years of prison on themselves. Worth to mention is a very big demonstration in the year 2007, where Supporto Legale made a big call to Genova. 100,000 people joined the demonstration behind the banner, "We make history." And that is very important. Like, it's too long to speak about this during this talk, you know, but the years after Genova have been seen like a very big fight among who was the bad, who was the good ones, who was causing the repression, how the black bloc was responsible for everything. A lot of people have been even calling the black bloc worse than the cops or only infiltrated by the cops. Supporto Legale made very clear that there is no division between good and bad protesters, but this is our history. We can speak about our history among us, but this is not the task of the state or of a court. And this is a very important message that they've been consistently spreading throughout the years. In connection to this, it's very important to mention that some people have been sitting years up to 14 years in prison because of the crimes of devastation and looting that was mentioned before. And that I like to share one little happy news with you, that Vincenzo Vecchi, who is an anarchist comrade who escaped, was the only one who managed to escape actually the prison and the sentencing, have been repaired to France all the last years. And yesterday, for the third time, the French courts decided against his extradition to Italy. So a lot of good wishes and luck to Vincenzo. Just to finish, you can check the internet presence of Supporto Legale online. There is also a lot of things have been produced 2 years ago for the 20 years of Genova. Enjoy.
Thank you. Then I have a question for Dan. You inspired the subtitle of this panel, "Another world is possible and it needs another kind of computing," as you also said at the conclusion of your talk. We know that this "another world is possible" was also the motto of the early 2000 protests, and this shows how we all advocated for this positive change. Then we saw how it went, but we can still elaborate on the tactics for imagining new form of resistance. Would you like to tell us more about this development that you also did through your political analysis of AI?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I think it's very much as Carlo and MF have already said. Actually, the movements of those times were very attentive to technology. You know, they were very creative in their use of what was available, of the internet, you know, newsrooms, the creation of indie media. And we've seen that cycle. You know, we saw during Occupy and the uprisings of 2011 across the Middle East, we saw the same parallels of social movement development and use of technology as part of that. And I think it's the same, it's something similar with AI, but AI is another step change. It's not really mainly about communication at all. It's about the very structure of things. So in that sense, the movements have always been about restructuring, and in continuity with their previous generations of movement, it means a restructuring of the technologies that we have and use as part of this different worlds that we want to move forward to. We need the movements and the technologies not separate.
Thank you. Also, you say that you see the rise of kind of computation that amplify the precondition for social division, And these algorithmic states of exception require the same solidarity and mutual aid that animated the alter global movements. Which practice of solidarity would you imagine today?
Well, I think the kinds of exclusions that I'm talking about are really across many, many different areas of society, but probably most urgently visible and most murderous in the kind of exclusions that were discussed in the conference yesterday, the ones at the borders. So any aspects of solidarity with, refugees and migrants of any kind, which we're seeing, thankfully, a rise of that kind of solidarity work, then those are the kind of solidarities that help to overcome the exclusions that are both social and technical. But I think for me, it's not that there's going to be a movement to overcome AI. It's that there's an aspect of having to tackle AI, having to deal with AI as part of having to deal with the system. I really agree with MF that these moments of repression are just the most visible part of the ongoing system, whichever flavor of politics happens to be in Parliament at the time. So it's going to happen in different areas. I mean, I found it amazing a moment ago when MF mentioned the militant anti-psychiatric movements, because actually for me, one of the most urgent areas is in mental health. These ridiculous technologies like ChatGPT are already being deployed to harshen and worsen and reduce the kind of support that people are getting around mental health problems. But on the positive side, there is that history already there, as there is in all these other areas of collective resistance. It's just that it needs now to have that kind of understanding, that way of tackling also the technological side. And I think that always comes with the kind of things that were so fundamental in the movements in 2001, which is the collective spaces. What I call, when I write about it, I call the people's councils. It's necessary for people in whatever situation to come together to enact a kind of critical pedagogy, to learn about what it is that are the mechanisms of their oppression and mechanisms of their misery, to understand those things in order together to figure out in these different areas what is the most urgent thing that needs to be done. And to me, now that I look back at it from all this time away, 2001, those movements are actually a really excellent template for that.
Thank you. So with that, I connect the fact that last November we did a conference that was called Madness, and we were, of course, criticizing what madness is. So we discussed a lot on this politics of care. If people are interested, we have all the videos online. Then I will open now to the audience, both the audience here in Berlin and the one online. So let's start with the people here in Berlin. So you can raise up your hands and Francesco can bring you the mic. There is one there already. Thanks.
Wow, really incredible to bring these themes together with the Genoa moment, a very big turning point, and then talking about the technological aspects of that. So I have some kind of question I'm going to try to formulate here. I want to put a spin on this, on the title of this talk, and say, is another virtual world problematic? And what we thought we were doing with indie media was a really powerful tool in a very specific window moment, but it very, very quickly gets co-opted by corporate powers, and that infrastructure of indie media became things like Twitter, became a social media that swallowed people into a whole nother kind of surveillance level world. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't really try to be as clever as possible with technologies to resist, but we really need some good critical analysis about how these things can be quickly played against us. And just as an example, I might try to point out, Seattle might not have happened if people had organized all of that digitally, because then the police and the state system would know how many people were going to show up for that protest and come with as many police as they needed to stop that intervention. And so we maybe need to be really strategic in thinking about like not thinking of more ways of creating resistance community through computing, but creating stronger ties in our local communities, not to be swallowed into a mousetrap that very powerful entities with the massive budgets they have to use the same tools that we did as grassroots movements bite us back really hard in the following, you know, as they realize what can be done with them. So it's not a specific question in there, but maybe if you want to reflect on that.
No, but it's great. You brought your experience. I don't know if somebody wants to comment, or we pass to the next question. Dan, you want to say?
Just quickly, I mean, like, I think like a critique of technology and its use is mandatory for every movement, and I think it's a very important, like that you mentioned this and how everything anyway can be co-opted by capital. I mean, this is like yesterday news, and we always have to be very watchful for this. Thank you for the intervention.
I don't know if Dan wants to add something since it's related to technology, or...
Yeah, very briefly. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, I hope it didn't come across that anything I'm suggesting is this idea of, you know, accelerating social movements through accelerated technology. Actually, very much the opposite. You know, I already think that we already have too much computing in the world, and along with many other kinds of extractive technology. When I use the term technology, I'm just talking about the infrastructural means of existence, that we need to address the full politics of the means which we organize our society in line with our social values. And I think if we do that strongly enough, then that's part of a radical transformation and something that's much harder, maybe not impossible, but much harder to recuperate.
Thank you. Then we can get another question from the audience, also comment. I mean, I know in the audience there are also people that experience this situation. You are also welcome to share something if you want. Is there someone? Yes.
Hello, yeah. That's exactly actually what I wanted to do. Maybe also to, or let's start by saying thanks to everyone who presented. And that was really nice to hear what you had to say about the time. And I would like to add maybe a female voice, just to sort of not leave with the understanding that it was an all-male event, which of course it wasn't. And the addition or the what I would like to share that sort of adds a bit to the different things that were being said. I would also like to sort of end or with a experience that was a very positive experience from Genoa, which is I spent most of the time at the summit in the media center across the street from the Diaz and watched the raid, which was also a very scary event to see while we were not being beaten up, most of us. And at the same time, we also shared what was said, the fear of being attacked afterwards. Like everyone in the streets of Genoa who wasn't yet arrested had this, like you described, situation of being afraid that they would come next after us, and being in the media center, having all of the coverage that we had made during those days, being the international activists in the media center, we were extremely scared that they would come after us next, after we had watched what had happened in the Diaz. And the positive thing was to experience how much everyone worried about us. And it was so beautiful to see how the Italian activists took a lot of energy to make sure that we would be able to leave safely. After that night of the Diaz, and we were sure they would come and want to get the material, all the videos that we had made, and all the audio recordings. and there were people who were make sure that we would, as a group, be sort of taken away from Genoa by bus and taken to Milano. And when we arrived by train as a group in Milano, there was a huge demonstration of people standing there waiting for us, clapping when we got off the train, and sort of that was a huge relief of not feeling so exposed to what we all felt was a overwhelming police terror that was coming after us, to see that there were so many people. That, like you said, it's sort of like very emotional still, to see the enormous solidarity from so many of the Italian people.
Thank you so much for sharing this. There is another question there.
Thank you very much. I think it's very, very important topic that you bring. That you talk again about Genova, because we know what's happening right now in Paris. We see what is happening in Greece. Yesterday we talked about a new urbanization of Greece. I'm hanging out there a lot. I'm there a lot. I was also part of the friends group during Genova and MF. And my question would be, because you mentioned before the Secret Service, and of course what happened with the tortures, and we knew that people had to kiss Mussolini images during arrest, and there's a kind of fascist continuation, and that is known in Italy, also from the repression from the 70s movement. So my question would be about the continuation of the Secret Service and the fascist elements in the police.
Do you want to answer? While I also translate to Carlo. Good.
It's such a wide topic. I mean, for me, the very existence of police is inherently fascist, just to begin with, you know. And like, I think in Genova was a moment where the brutality of Italian police came to an international public, you know, but for those who grew up in Italy, I mean, like this continuity from the 70s was there every day. I mean, as I mentioned with Naples, or like in other moments, the police and the other corpses we need to remember, because there is Carabinieri, there is Guardia di Finanza, there is different of them which have been involved heavily in the 70s in a wider range of activity against the movement and the Italian populace. And this continuity is there to this day, and it's not there because it's a Meloni and post-fascist government there, but it was always there also during the center-left and all during the other governments, because the main heads, the main spirit, the main corporate guys of the police and Carabinieri and the end is actually inherently fascist for me. But yeah, this is obviously like completely like superficial answer. It can only be in this 1 second.
Carlo.
Se ho capito bene la domanda, io credo che la differenza tra 2001 e oggi è che questa cultura fascista si sia ancora più radicata nella cultura, come dire, popolare o comunque della gente. E
so he says that the difference between 2001 and today, he thinks that this fascist culture is even more embedded in the popular culture and the minds of the people.
Non è solo un problema di come dire, simboli, è proprio una scelta culturale forte che è emersa molto bene negli ultimi anni con quelli che vengono chiamati i nuovi sovranismi, le nuove identità, che rafforzano, come dire, un percorso politico che è molto diverso da quello che, come dire, i più moderati si immaginavano di intraprendere nel 2001.
And it's not only a matter of symbolism, but it's something that we see in this new emergence of a form of politics that are related to new form of sovereignty, sovereignism, that's yeah, it's something that would have been very impossible to imagine time ago. So it's different, but it's taking different shapes. Now I would like to ask to the online... yeah, sorry, Dan, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I did want to just say something about that.
Yeah, of
That's
course.
okay. Yeah, thank you. I just want to say, because I obviously, well, perhaps it's not obvious, but I agree that with the idea that fascism never went away. But I think the fascist culture that Carlo was just talking about is a really important aspect. I'm very influenced by the people who were the thinkers of the movements of 1968 or after 1968. Thinking about both the amazing energy and creativity of those uprisings, but also why they failed. Why is it that so many people, how is it that so many people come to support these deepening fascist cultures? And I think that's one of the reasons why AI is so important, because it's not only just, or even mainly, that it's a tool that's going to be used by fascist governments, which it undoubtedly will be. It's how does it lead to the generation of cultures that support those movements? In other words, as they might say, how does something like AI and its pervasive relationships in everyday life, in every institutional interaction, every interpersonal interaction, how could it increase microfascism?
Okay. There is another question, but we are already out of time, so unfortunately, I don't know, I cannot. Yeah, there is the online question. Let's also make the people from the digital world being here.
Okay, a very practical last question for a very fast answer, maybe. Which will be your advices for any other person finding him or herself in a repressive, dangerous protest? Is it there any prassi, or is it just white flag and run away? I will maybe translate it in Italian. Avete dei consigli per chiunque si dovesse trovare in una protesta repressiva e pericolosa? Esiste una prassi o si può solo alzare bandiera bianca e scappare?
Who wants to give this knowledge?
I don't know. I only knew black flags in my life as well. Now, joke aside, I think it's very important that wherever you are and whichever type of actions or demonstrations you're taking place, that you're very aware of what you're doing and of its consequences. Because the biggest problems are where actually you are not well aware of what might happen after, and you just go, as it would be like a little party. And it's important to know that even demonstrations or action that you might deem as peaceful, or you might think nothing is going to happen there, that it's not always entirely your decision. It's always a lot of elements coming at play, like the will of police, immediate outbursts of, people, deciding is a moment for direct action, whatsoever, so it's important always to keep this in the back of your mind, not to be scared, but just to be, as you walk the streets, just aware of your environment. And it's important to talk with your friends, comrades, loved ones about this, and also about your fears and everything, also about this emotional part, not to forget about this, because this is what brings you also forward every day when you have to deal with difficult situations like traumas or like beatings or whatsoever. It's important not to forget this aspect.
Okay, I feel really bad now to cut the further questions, but then we have a panel coming also equally important. We are going to speak about targeted by surveillance, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks and network repression with Stella Assange, Kevin Gozzola, moderated by Stefania Maurizi. And I wanted to say that if we want to go on with the discussion that is very needed, we are meeting on Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. There will be a workshop again with Carlo Bachschmidt and also Manolo Luppichini that is called G8 Genoa 2001, a grassroots media forensic toolbox, and we will speak and analyze all of these for 3 hours. So I think there are still some spots available. Please come there so we can really go on with the discussion more in depth. And now I just wanted to conclude, but 1 minute to call here on stage Cassie Thornton, because we spoke about the idea of involving people to create a knowledge that is shared, and this is the next event we will do. So Cassie, you just want to come please on stage. You want to just announce what is going to happen April 13. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Cassie, and I'm tasked with hosting events that happen before and after all the conferences for Disruption Network Lab, and the name of these events are Regular Disruptions. And the idea is to have events that kind of upset the feeling that we are ultimately doomed. Because, you know, we're talking about pretty heavy stuff, and I think especially when it comes to prisons and incarceration and big tech, and how those really, I mean, they provide the world we live in, we benefit from them, and we're so integrated in each other's lives. And so I think the space that we wanted to create, which is on April 13th, will happen at a secret location. And the idea is that it's a chance to actually sort of talk more personally about our relationships to these systems. And what we're doing is working in two ways. One is that there's a group of people here right now. Many of them are in the back here. And they're a group of people that we're calling interlocutors. They're friends of mine. They're also really rigorous people in their own fields who are not experts in prisons or smart prisons or big tech necessarily, but the idea is that they're here to kind of witness the conference and to lead us into conversation that can go kind of deeper into our own lives and practices. I wanted to introduce them because I think they're really important people, and if you want to talk to them, I think it's a great way to start a conversation now that can lead like into the world and out of the conference. So Zofie Semedai is a researcher. She studied neuroscience. She's a poet and a mindfulness and consent instructor. Zofie, do you want to say hi? Fanuel is an artist, a teacher, and an organizer concerned with race, poetics, movements, and intimacy, and his new book is coming out called On Cuddling, Love to Death in the Racial Embrace. Fanuel. Ivan Chaparro is a designer, an artist, a musician, a scholar, an educator, and he's the founder of Resonar Lab. Ivan. And Asen is watching from bed right now. Asen Ozerkana is an actress from Istanbul, and she's working on a theater project integrating AI and storytelling right now. You should come to our event, work with us and with these people to kind of talk about sort of the nature of how prisons actually are a part of our lives, whether we know it or not. And then we're also working with a mutual aid project called The Hologram, where we'll get a chance to sort of talk about some of like the deeper patterns that we live with that are very much a part of the sort of larger global prison system. Yeah.
Thank you. And so we finish now this panel. I want to thank a lot Dan, MF, and Carlo for being with us. And we meet again with Carlo and Manolo on Sunday afternoon to go on with this discussion. And thank you for being here. And sorry again, I had to cut the questions, but the time could have been, you know, maybe we needed 3 hours for this panel. Thank you.